The darkness of the forest enveloped her as she made her way down the overgrown path. She had heard about the abandoned cabin deep in the woods and the strange noises that echoed from it at night. She thought it would make for an interesting article, but now she was regretting her decision to come here alone. The darkness of the forest enveloped her as she made her way down the overgrown path. She had heard about the abandoned cabin deep in the woods and the strange noises that echoed from it at night. She thought it would make for an interesting article, but now she was regretting her decision to come here alone. As she approached the cabin, she noticed that the door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open and peered inside, her flashlight illuminating the dusty interior. It was then that she heard a faint whisper, like a voice calling out to her. She couldn't make out the words, but she felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over her. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her and she was plunged into darkness. She screamed and banged on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder and she realized they were coming from all around her, as if they were closing in on her. She could feel their presence, the cold breath on the back of her neck and the soft touch of their fingers on her skin. And then she heard a voice, clear and sinister, speaking right into her ear. "You should never have come here," it said. "You belong to us now." The darkness was absolute, and the whispers never stopped. She was trapped, alone in the cabin with the unknown horrors that lurked within. As the night wore on, she heard strange noises coming from the depths of the cabin. Scratching and shuffling, like something was moving around in the shadows. She tried to call for help, but her phone had no signal. She was completely cut off from the outside world. She huddled in a corner, fear gripping her as the whispers grew louder and the noises grew closer. And then, just when she thought she couldn't take it any longer, she heard a sound outside. It was the sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel path. She raced to the door and banged on it with all her might, screaming for help. The door creaked open and she stumbled outside, tears streaming down her face. There, in the pale moonlight, stood a figure. It was a hunter, who had heard her screams and come to her rescue. She collapsed into his arms, grateful to be saved. But as they made their way back to civilization, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them. Something dark and evil that still lurked in the shadows of the cabin. And she knew, deep down, that she would never be the same again. As time passed, the woman found that she couldn't shake off the memories of her night in the abandoned cabin. The hunter who had rescued her became a constant presence in her life, as she sought comfort in his company. Slowly, she began to realize that she was falling in love with him. He was strong and brave, and he had saved her from a terrible fate. But as their relationship grew, she noticed that strange things began to happen. She would hear whispers in the night, and sometimes she thought she saw shadows moving in the corners of her eyes. She couldn't shake the feeling that the horrors of the cabin had followed her home. The hunter was concerned, and he tried to protect her from whatever was haunting her. But one day, she disappeared. No one knows what happened to her, but some say that she was taken back to the cabin, to the place where the horrors still lurked. And so, her love story with the hunter became a tale of terror, a reminder of the darkness that can consume us if we're not careful. The horror that haunted the woman was never truly identified. Some say it was the spirits of the long-dead residents of the cabin, who had become trapped there and were seeking revenge on the living. Others believe it was something far more sinister, a malevolent entity that had attached itself to her and was feeding off her fear. As for the missing stone, that was a mystery that was never solved. Some say that it was a powerful artifact, capable of summoning forth the darkest of powers. Others believe it was simply a myth, a legend used to scare those who dared to venture into the woods. Regardless of what the stone actually was, the woman never found it. Her search for answers only led her deeper into the darkness, and eventually, she was consumed by it completely. In the end, the horror remains, a lingering presence in the abandoned cabin and the surrounding woods. A warning to all who dare to enter, to never venture too far, or risk becoming its next victim. Even as the woman was consumed by the darkness, her love for the hunter never faded. She thought of him often, and wished that they could have been together, far away from the horrors of the cabin. Years passed, and the legend of the missing stone and the haunted cabin became a distant memory, a story told around campfires to scare young children. But the woman's love for the hunter lived on, a quiet and bittersweet memory that only she carried with her. And then, one day, the hunter returned to the cabin. He had never given up hope of finding her, and he was determined to face whatever dangers lay ahead in his quest to be reunited with his love. He entered the cabin, and there, in the dim light, he saw her. She was as beautiful as he remembered, but her eyes were filled with a sadness that he had never seen before. They stood there for what seemed like an eternity, locked in each other's gaze. And then, as the first light of dawn broke through the windows, she was gone. The hunter never saw her again, but he always felt her presence with him. And he knew, deep in his heart, that she still loved him, just as much as he loved her. The hunter was torn between sadness and anger over the situation. On the one hand, he was devastated that he had lost the love of his life, and that she had been consumed by the darkness. On the other hand, he was furious that he had been powerless to protect her, and that she had suffered so much. He felt like he had failed her, and the anger and frustration gnawed at him every day. But despite all of that, his love for her never faded. He knew that he would never stop searching for her, that he would do whatever it took to find her and bring her back into the light. And so, he spent the rest of his days traveling the world, searching for any clue that would lead him to her. And although he never found her, he remained true to his love for her, and his memories of their time together were a source of comfort and strength for him until the day he died. As it turned out, the missing stone was indeed the Tesseract, a powerful artifact that had the ability to bend time and space. And with it, the woman was finally able to reach out to the hunter, who had been searching for her for so many years. She used the Tesseract to create a connection between their two worlds, and as she gazed into the shining stone, she saw the hunter's face. He was older now, but his eyes were just as bright and filled with love as they had been all those years ago. Tears filled her eyes as she realized that she could finally be with him again. She reached out, and as their fingers touched, she felt a spark of energy flow between them. In that moment, they were reunited, and their love was as strong as it had ever been. They stood together, holding each other close, as they both marveled at the power of their love, and the magic of the Tesseract. From that day forward, they were never apart, and they remained together until the end of their days, their love as bright as the shining stone that had brought them back together.